You know the exact feeling. Your stomach drops, your heart rate spikes, and a cold flush of panic washes over you. In a fraction of a second, you realize you've made a terrible mistake. It's an abrupt, irreversible moment where reality shatters your expectations. The strange thing about making a mistake is how it feels right up until that moment of realization. Journalist Catherine Schultz calls this error blindness. While discovering you are wrong is a jarring experience, the actual state of being wrong feels exactly like being right. You don't know you're in the dark until the lights abruptly turn on. Because that realization is so uncomfortable, we actively try to avoid it. Culturally, we stigmatize failure, leading many of us to develop a baseline level of adicophobia, the fear of failure. To protect ourselves from the pain of being wrong, we retreat into a guarded cocoon of certainty. This protective instinct often hardens into what psychologist Carol Dweck identifies as a fixed mindset. From this perspective, a mistake is a final verdict proving a permanent lack of intelligence or capability. Treating mistakes as fatal threats to our identity causes us to hide them, deny them, and avoid any situation where we might stumble. This defensive posture effectively shuts down the fundamental mechanisms our minds require to evolve. To understand what we are shutting down, we have to look past the psychological embarrassment and examine the exact millisecond of physical detection inside the human brain. Deep within the medial prefrontal cortex sits the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC. Think of it as your brain's internal alarm system. The moment it detects a mismatch between expectation and reality, it flashes an error signal. That alarm triggers a rapid chemical cascade. Epinephrine spikes your physical alertness, while acetylcholine hyper-focuses your attention onto the specific neural circuits that just failed. This cocktail of neurochemicals serves a specific purpose. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman points out that this chemical friction is the non-negotiable prerequisite for adult neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to physically rewire itself. That sharp, stinging pain of making a mistake acts as the mandatory ignition spark for the brain to rewire and upgrade its own circuitry. If our biology demands this friction for growth, the question becomes, how do we harness that spark on purpose? Educational researcher Dr. Manu Kapoor found an answer in a methodology he calls productive failure. Instead of giving students a step-by-step formula to solve a complex problem, he forces them to attempt it on their own first. They struggle, they test ideas, and predictably, they fail. But that failure does something critical. It creates a deep, targeted awareness of a knowledge gap. By struggling and failing first, the students' brains are primed and eager for the correct information. When the expert solution is finally revealed, they absorb and retain it at a much higher rate. Deliberately walking into that kind of engineered struggle requires grit. Psychologist Angela Duckworth studied high-stakes environments like West Point, finding that perseverance through repeated setbacks predicts success far more accurately than innate talent. A growth mindset allows gritty individuals to process failure as raw data, evidence that a specific strategy failed, rather than a final verdict on their intelligence. By intentionally designing environments that invite struggle, we transform errors from psychological threats into optimized high-yield learning tools. Knowing the neuroscience and the behavioral data is useful, but it doesn't entirely erase the daily emotional weight of making mistakes. How do we practically live with that biological friction? Centuries before we could map the brain's neurochemistry, the ancient Stoics developed an operational framework specifically for processing failure. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius practiced the dichotomy of control, focusing entirely on his own actions and judgments, while accepting external failures as necessary tests of character. Stoics actively embraced their mistakes through the practice of amor fati, the love of one's fate, viewing every error as essential material for growth, based on the principle that the obstacle itself becomes the path forward. Eastern philosophy approached the exact same human problem through a different lens. The Buddhist principle of dukkha identifies the ego's rigid attachment to success as the true source of our suffering, rather than the objective facts of the failure itself. Taoism complements this with Wu Wei, or effortless action. When a setback occurs, fighting the reality of the error only creates more friction. Yielding to the mistake and adapting around it allows one to find harmony in the face of apparent setbacks. Stripped of our ego and cultural stigma, A mistake is objectively just a biological signal and a philosophical crucible. By uniting the psychological safety of modern science with the resilience of ancient wisdom, we ensure our margin of error becomes our greatest margin for growth.